Hello, and welcome to What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're going to talk about parental stress and whether it might actually be worse than ever.
Under pressure, ding, ding, ding,
Right.
ding. Ding, 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 ding.
Good news, everybody. The Surgeon General says we're all under a lot of stress and it might be dangerous to our health. Might be. We're going to find out today.
I don't think we can get copyright violated as long as I keep singing off key. So I think we're
okay,
fine.
that's right. Right.
But first, Amy, it's time for mailbag. They're coming for me in the mailbag today.
Yeah.
100% rightfully so, frankly.
This is useful. This came in an email, info@whatfreshhellpodcast.com. You can always reach out to us with episode ideas, feedback. We read it.
Or things I do wrong, like Alyssa did. I really love the podcast, but wanted to point out a likely factual error in your 8 Ways to Make Better Decisions episode. Margaret referred to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle as the effect that an observer has on an observable phenomenon. What Margaret likely meant to say was observer effect. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle is the principle that an increase in the accuracy of the position measurement of a quantum particle leads to a corresponding decrease in the measurement of the particle's momentum.
That's what you meant.
Yeah, that's
what you meant, basically.
i.e., we can either know where a particle is located or how fast it's moving, but not both. But the Heisenberg uncertainty principle has nothing to do with whether or not the particle is observed.
So I guess
Amy, you learn something new every day.
Why did you think it was called the Heisenberg uncertainty? Like, where did you pick that up? Because if you said it, I'm like, I guess that's what it's called. I wouldn't know.
Have no idea. And I have to say, I now, butterfly effect style, have to go back through my entire life.
Yeah. When was that moment?
Correct this, because it is something I say a lot and I'm dead wrong about what it is. Where I got those things mixed up, I don't know. Possibly Breaking Bad has a lot of Heisenberg references. Is that when it came in? And somebody said, well, what's Heisenberg? And it's that you can't study something without changing it. And that idea that you can't study something without changing it is very useful to me in many spheres. And so now I fear I have said this a dozen times.
You've been telling everybody.
People.
So it's called the observer effect.
It's
the
called
Heisenberg
the observer
principle.
Effect.
You can only observe one thing at a time, but not both. I feel like that's useful in a maybe less global way. That's also interesting.
Yeah, I don't know that I can apply the uncertainty of quantum particles, but the observer effect is very useful, that by observing something, you change the behavior. And we do a lot of studies. And I think I've probably mentioned it before on the podcast, because when you watch kids, they play differently. When you watch moms, they do different things.
Right.
Like,
when you watch parents, we parent differently. Right.
Very hard to account for what I now know is the observer effect. First of all, my apologies to Mr. Heisenberg. Totally wrong. And my apologies to you, Alyssa. Dead wrong and been wrong for a long time. My father and mother would say of me, often in error, but never in doubt. And man, is that how I approached the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. I was swinging for the fences with that reference. And thank God you stopped me, Alyssa, because I was a runaway train.
Thank you. Thank you for reaching out. We love mailbags like those. Even if they're proving us wrong, we still want to know.
It's fine. We're not, first of all, this should be a big lesson to all of you in how you take the things we say on this podcast, because we don't really know what we're talking about. But second of all, in this particular example, I'm glad we righted this ship, because, wow, I've been on a tear.
We do like to look to people who know more than us about issues, such as the Surgeon General of the United States. I mean, that seems like that's a pretty good source.
Amy.
Look at that segue. Did you even feel it?
Segue.
Did you feel the breeze?
It was beautiful.
This just came out in September 2024. So this is very recent. The Surgeon General does not put out advisories on health so often. When he or she does, it's usually for pretty serious threats to health, like school shootings, AIDS, obesity, things like
Cancer,
that. And in this case, cancer. And last month, Dr. Vivek Murthy issued an advisory specifically on the mental health and well-being of parents, declaring it an urgent public health issue, like as bad as cigarettes. He's saying, basically, Dr. Murthy.
Hashtag agree.
Same. It's basically the Heisenberg principle that parenting is as bad as cigarettes. That's what he said. That's not what he said.
I mean, I so agree with this, and we've talked about it on the podcast some, but the amount how hard this job is really hard to overstate. And I think how I've been watching Love is Blind, Amy, because I like to.
Because you have a lot of
And
stress as a parent, and that's
yeah,
your
so
stress
I
relief.
like to watch Love is Blind when
Sure.
I'm folding the laundry, making my bed. And what's also fascinating about parenthood is how different it is than the job interview for it, you know? That like on Love is Blind, it's like, "What's your favorite meal?" "Oh, I love to do like a saute." "Oh, yes, I love you now, even though I can't see you." And then you're like, ask this person if they know how to fix a dryer. Like, what you are gonna there are going to be some real life skills you need. I always say you date for a dance partner, and then what you actually need is, like, a mountaineering partner, and some
Mhm.
days you need, like, a sewer fixing partner, like, to
Mhm.
go down and, like, get bitten in the face by rats as you crawl through the sewers.
I think it's also hard for people who aren't parents to really get it. I mean, I think there's a little bit of like tweet, like, oh, yeah, having a baby is so hard, but you wouldn't change it for a thing. Like, yeah. Like you say that every week. There's a little bit of that. And
Uh,
I think there's also, just quite a bit of you don't get it. But there is data. The study that underpinned this whole public advisory showed that 20% of adults US adults said that in the past month they experienced extreme levels of stress, but 33% of parents said that. And I'm like, why isn't it 83%? Periods of extreme stress. 48% of parents say that most days, this is actually alarming. 48% of parents say that on most days, their stress is, quote, completely overwhelming. Half of parents say they are completely overwhelmed by stress every day. Every day.
yeah, that's and I do think that, first of all, I have to quote Mo Rocca, who says, "People without kids will never know the simple joy of not having kids." And
Right.
it's like, you're not wrong, Mo.
Yeah.
Like, it is so specifically stressful in a way that I think is hard. Um, and I think and I don't know if we'll get into the financial breakdowns and those kind of stressors or whether these are, what do you call, like, value takeaway stressors.
What do you
And I
mean?
do find, like, does having kids, if you are below a certain income level, is that naturally more stressful
Oh,
than
yes,
not?
for sure, and we'll talk about
For
that. Right,
sure.
right.
Having kids with chronic health problems. I mean, you just think, you know, uh, talking to friends who have had kids with difficult behavior issues and they're trying to decide whether or not they want that kid to live outside of their home and they're not sure about the safety of where that kid ends up, having a child who is incarcerated, having a child who has an illness. I mean, there's kind of baseline parenting and then there's parenting with uh special circumstances, I guess, and I wonder how much we know about the breakdown of these statistics in terms of, like, is this, like, a regular parent who's paying the bills and, like, getting through the days without any special circumstances, or how attached to special circumstances are these statistics on stress?
Well, I think it's that your heart is hard and that a
Yes.
lot of people have a special stressor and some have 5 or 6.
Yes.
So, let's skip ahead to one of the big, like, aha moments that I got out of this. We talk a lot on the podcast about ACEs, and how it affects, people as we mature. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and studies have shown that if you have 3 or 4 adverse childhood experiences that include things like you were saying, an incarcerated parent, a death of a parent, divorce, having to move all the time, whatever. These
Right,
things are
violence
each
in your house,
violence in your home,
abuse, yep.
adverse childhood experiences. And once, if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, you are more likely to have diabetes 40 years later. And it's for
Mhm.
reasons we're still trying to understand. But that stress bakes into the childhood brain, that sort of chronic extreme stress in important ways.
Yeah.
what I didn't really get is that this ACEs thing absolutely goes for parental adult experiences too. And that's what
Mm.
this study gets into. So I'll quote, mental health conditions disproportionately affect certain groups of parents, such as low income households, those with job instability, racial and ethnic minorities, sexual and gender minorities, immigrants, parents and caregivers of undocumented children, parents who are incarcerated, who experience food security, who are divorced, who are in the military, who have disabilities, who experience chronic medical problems, among others. And I mean, yeah, I can say yes to there are things on that list, and I'm like, yeah, that's me. And I
Yeah.
think most people listening will be like, yeah, I got one of those. I got two of those. Maybe some people have more than that. But those adverse experiences, yes, do increase your levels of stress, and importantly, then affect your parenting.
Yeah, and I think can be the kind of thing that is hard to quantify while it's happening sometimes. I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I had 3 kids under 4 and was so just chronically underslept and just going through every day with that, like, glass in the eyeballs kind of, real, and then some postpartum anxiety and depression thrown on top, and my husband having a really difficult and stressful work situation. I really can recall being out of it for maybe 6 months, whether everybody started sleeping or whatever that moment was, I can't even tell you, and realizing that I felt like the world was becoming colorized again from black and white. Like, I cannot believe how different this feels than being in it, and I did not realize how low I was when I was in the place of the year of
And
bad
do
times.
you think that was sleep deprivation, or was it stress, or was it a little bit of both?
It was both, and
Mm-hmm.
and I will say that I fundamentally discounted as a parent. I wanted to have kids. I chose to have kids very specifically. I got married late, and so I always was someone who thought like, "Well, maybe I'm not gonna have kids, that's too bad, I really wanted them." Then had 3 and 4 years when I was in my late 30s, and I think that I thought like, "Okay, having kids will be fun." It's amazing how much, and I remember when I told my mother I was pregnant with my 3rd, and, most mothers are like, "A baby, hooray." I remember my mom made this kind of sighing noise. She had had 3 kids in 3 years, even closer than mine were, and she said, "Oh, it's so hard for the first couple of years," and I remember
Mm.
kind of being
Are
taken
you
aback,
right,
like,
right,
"Whoa,
right.
I thought your line was, 'Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be gammy again,'"
Mm-hmm.
and that wasn't her reaction at all, and it's interesting, I think, how rarely we talk about that part of it, how hard and frightening, and I mean, I still see it with my kids when they're struggling with specific stuff and social stuff. The way that a kid of mine finding himself, this is not a real example. I'm not talking about my actual kids, but for example, a kid coming home and crying that they were bullied in a really mean way at school. The way that knife goes up under your ribs into the soft tissue. I mean, it's it's a stress that just goes into I don't know what part of your body, but it is a pain unlike anything I ever experienced for myself.
That's an interesting, right. So you're absorbing the stress of your own stressful situations, but also the stress of your child's stressful situations as if they were your own sometimes. Sometimes even more than your kids, because a kid going through a stressful situation can kind of dump it on you as they're supposed to. You're their parent, and then like go away and go play Minecraft and have a pretty nice afternoon. And you're left holding that stress and feeling as upset as when they told you, not knowing that they feel better now because they worked it out by
Right.
talking to
They
you.
put it in your lap and
Right.
bounced
You're
off.
holding it. You're holding the stress. So yeah, that makes sense to me that you're actually taking on the stress of other people beside yourself. No wonder it's cumulative.
Yeah,
And
absolutely, and I think that sometimes moms get a reputation of like, yeah, hovering over and
that's
worrying about
right.
stupid stuff and
Right.
stupid mom, but
Let him go down the slide by himself and stop hovering, and everything will be fine if you just stop worrying about things so much.
yeah, and guess what? That's not available to most of us. Like, that lane is literally not available.
Right.
I have something else to say about that. We'll be right back. Also, in terms of talking about worry and stress, I think this happens on a micro and macro level. So I'm not only worrying about, okay, we have a birthday party and then, oh my gosh, like, look at the holidays are just around the corner. Like, where are we spending Thanksgiving? And have I started getting gifts for people? Oh, and don't forget this birthday. Like that kind of invisible workload hum of stress. And then there's the big picture stress as I have kids. I have one kid who's 2 years away from college. Time to start thinking about that. That feels like a big stress, right?
Yes.
Then there's still like this one is struggling socially and what am I do I have a role in that? And can I help the grades change? And a lot of the stuff I don't have control over, but I want to change. That's hard. And then I have found, and I just went, I just took teens to the movies. They saw a scary movie and I had to go in because they were under 17. And I was just watching the trailers and all the trailers because it was a scary movie. I was just going to stay through the trailers and then wait in the lobby because they told me whatever. The usher was like, you can't leave. You have to stay. I was like, all right,
Oh
as
my
soon as you
gosh.
leave.
Okay. Yeah.
I watched 6 scary trailers. And again, I used to like scary movies. I can't watch anything scary because I'm in charge of keeping all danger away from everyone in my own mind. Like,
Yes.
I've had to restart my whole relationship with therapy and trying to take care of my own stress and anxiety because, like, I have fallen apart after watching the Smile 2 trailer, you know? I mean, the idea I just think it heightens the daily stress, and then it heightens the stress of being alive in 2024 in America and beyond,
Yeah.
and that sometimes gets kind of dismissed, like, "Oh, moms and their
It
nervousness. They're
does.
so
It does.
nervous."
It drives me nuts. And this report tries to argue, like, is it really worse? Are things really harder than it used to be? And they argue yes. So let's talk about some of the reasons why things are maybe even harder. Because also, you and I mean, I have a child who's 21. So I parented 20 years before some people who are listening right now. Are things
Right.
even more stressful now? I think they are. So let's talk about why. Um, the pandemic, we can certainly point to the pandemic as being a cause of parental stress, although this report says, but this started before the pandemic. The pandemic made it even worse, but this increase and decrease in parental mental health started before the pandemic, actually.
I
There's no
mean,
question we're all still dealing with the pandemic and its after effects.
it's gotta be information, right? I mean, isn't it too much information? That's what I think stresses me out.
Well, I mean, maybe this wasn't on their list. It was
Huh.
more like too much social media. It was more
That's
like concrete
yeah.
stuff. I
Huh.
mean, I think social media is part of it, but it was much more wonky than that. So
Oh,
the
that's interesting.
pandemic,
Because if I said what I think has increased my stress in the
sure.
last 20 years, it would be over access to information.
Well, let's segue to this was further down their list, but I think that would sort of parallel with what the Surgeon General calls a culture of comparison, which I think social
Mm.
media,
Yeah, that's what it
enables.
is. Yeah.
So he says we have unrealistic expectations for parents and around parenting strategies that again are being constantly presented to you on TikTok, right? And also unrealistic expectations around milestones and achievements and what kids could and should be doing by a certain age.
Yes.
I guess that's true. And that makes success and fulfillment for your children feel increasingly out of reach. This comparison culture.
Yes. Yes. Magic box full of fulfillment is out there
Right,
somewhere. Other
right.
people are finding it. You have to work really hard to find it.
The studies showed that parents are expressing anxiety about college for their children, and it sounds like that'll be hard, and where they're going to go, and will we be able to afford that? They're expressing that concern at younger and younger ages of children.
Right. Because, like, you're not going to be able to. Like, that's the
Right.
reality. I mean, it's
They won't get in
just
anywhere, and you won't be able to afford it.
yeah, they
And
won't get in anywhere,
there's a lot
and
to
then
worry
you
about.
won't be able to afford it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you do afford it, does it even make sense to saddle these kids and ourselves with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt when, in my case, I'm going to be an early senior citizen when my last kid goes to college? Like, is that a time I want to be getting into like tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt? It is stressful.
Um, But concrete, and so I guess they would say that there are these concrete increases in stress and expectations that then are sort of refracted through social media and your phone's making you feel bad. But it's about these specific things.
Yeah.
The number one thing that they sort of said, they're like, everybody thinks pandemic, but it's not the pandemic, that our systems still operate as if there's going to be a parent at home under the
Yeah.
default assumption that there's childcare, free childcare available at your house after school, during the summer, during school vacations. And if your kid does an activity, that there's somebody available with a minivan to drive them there,
Yeah.
that magical parent in the house that is waiting to take care of the kids is there. Our systems still presume that, even though that's not the way we're living.
That's right. Yeah. And the idea of everybody's eating the rainbow and is self-fulfilled and is
Yeah.
having conversations around the dinner table and is having this like Betty Crocker mom experience and like, I can't think of a TV dad, the dad from Bewitched guy, experience when in fact people are working and doing all of these different things. And I mean, we try really hard to be part of the solution here, not part of the problem, but like, then you've got podcasts and advice telling you like, well, just eat the rainbow. It's like, eat the rainbow. I'm trying to like get 4 hours of sleep a night. I mean, I think it can be really, really hard when there is so little support for moms and the expectations have stayed the same.
We just interviewed Mark Bittman and talking about cooking with your kids. And he said that. He said, this gets a lot easier when somebody's home during the day to soak the beans, right? To pull the chicken breast out of the freezer. I'm like, right, it is.
Right.
It is. You can't come home at 6 with the chicken in the freezer and begin to prepare a healthy dinner for your starving kids after you pick them up from childcare. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
And yet we're still like, really, you should be though. And that is
Fast
predicated
food
on
is
somebody home
poison.
cooking.
It's like, okay, great. But like on Friday afternoon, sometimes those nuggets are just calling us because I got nothing left.
Because there's nothing in the refrigerator and nobody's home yet. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then there's the cost of childcare, which has gone up 26% in a decade.
Yeah.
So there's if you have a 2-parent family, 2 parents working, and often at a salary that is barely making the cost of the childcare.
Right.
It's stressful.
Right.
And it's concrete.
And I mean, I do think that the unrealistic social lack of safety net, which we've talked about with different people on the podcast, is really hard. That families are farther apart. Fewer people have, I mean, my mom grew up in a 2-family house. So 2 sets of families with 5 kids each living in this one house. And everybody in their family lived within a 4-block radius. It was kind of like, it did take a little
village.
Irish village of Irish people to take care of each other's kids. And if somebody got sick and, it is really challenging now, even as an adult. I just think it's so hard when you've got a sick parent and you've got little kids at home and you're not have built-in care for any of those people. I mean, that's a 40-hour job outside of the job you're doing during the week.
Mm-hmm.
And forget the mental load of it all, because you're probably feeling like no one's sitting around being like, I'm doing a great job for my kids and my elderly parent. And the squeeze that people are under with those situations is brutal.
Is real. And it's literal. The studies show that the amount of time that people spend at work, the hours they spend at their job, has increased. I think commute times have gone up. And even if you're working at home, fine, you're just doing emails for another hour, right? The amount of hours we are supposed to spend working has increased as a society. And somehow the amount of time people spend in hands-on childcare. When you get home from your job that would have been 9 to 5 and now it's 8 to 7 and you haven't seen your kids all day. Yes, you're going to bathe them. You're going to read to them. You're going to play with them, right? It's active. So the time at work is increasing and the amount of time people are spending hands-on with their children is also increasing.
Yeah,
and there's less time to do both of it.
You really end up with some really immovable forces. And I will say my kids are now 12 and up. And the biggest thing I don't miss is the fact that I can leave my kids at home is such a game changer. When I had little kids, if I forgot the milk and my husband wasn't home, I was packing 3 kids back into the car, going back to the store, unpacking 3 kids, getting them in a stroller, going in, getting milk, packing everybody back in car
Right,
seats, getting
right.
home. Little kids are such a non-variable, right? Like, they are such a fixed mark in terms of you literally cannot leave them alone. You can't leave them unattended at
Mhm.
all. And
It's
I
the observation principle. You can never leave them
you
unobserved. It's a corollary.
cannot leave them unobserved.
Right, right.
Exactly. And just the complication of that, I remember when my own mom got sick and, I have a spouse who travels for work and luckily he was able to switch stuff around, but otherwise it just becomes I have a parent who is ill, who I need to be with, and I have 3 kids who I don't have anyone to watch. I mean, and
Mhm.
I have great neighbors and I could call people and get them rides and, "Hey, could you hold them for 2 hours?" And people will do you favors, but the idea that we're just so on our own in this is really tough. Really
It's
tough.
tough, and it's concrete, and it's probably getting worse. And
Yeah.
then there's school shootings,
Yeah.
which is obvious but worth stating. 3 out of 4 parents list school shootings as a significant stressor.
Yeah.
And it probably should be because firearms are now the leading cause of death among kids in the US ages 1 to 19. And that
Yeah.
is different than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that is, yeah, that's really stressful. So I mean, none of this is good news, but it also does make me feel better. It's like, stop worrying about the invitations for the birthday party, overthinker, and just, relax, have a glass of Chardonnay and everything will be fine. Well, we're looking at all this like, no, we're being squeezed from every
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about school being like, okay, when I drop my kids off between 8 and 3, I know my kids are in a safe place. I know there's someone else's problem. So like tag you're
Right.
it and I kind of relax for the rest of the day. Yeah, that school shootings
Right.
has kind of robbed you of that.
Of school feeling safe. Right. So all of this means that our mental health is affected as parents. Stress causes constant stress. Chronic stress can cause anxiety and depression. And for example, there's a study that shows the more food insecurity you have as a
Mm,
family, the greater the likelihood that the parent in that family will express feelings of depression or anxiety.
right.
They go
How
together.
could you
Chronic stress and
almost
depression and
not? I
anxiety.
mean,
Right.
you think about the stress of like, I have to, and I have to figure out how to get my family fed every day without enough money. That's going to be top of list. And it's
That's
going to
yeah.
be something that just grinds at you.
Yeah. And then that stress. So then that stress affects your parenting.
Yeah.
Because how could it not? I'm not blaming it. It's inescapable that you would be an anxious person if that was something you were living with every day. That is going to affect your parenting. Then that affects your kid. Then that affects your kid's mental health. And it becomes the complex interplay of bidirectional effects, as the study says, that the parent's stress affects the child's stress affects the parents, and we're off to the races.
Yeah. And I think this is an area I was speaking about it in a different context the other day that like kids who struggle, it's so tough that like kids who struggle tend to be liked less by their peers and teachers. Therefore, they struggle more.
Mhm.
Therefore, they have worse grades. Therefore, they have worse outcomes. It just feels like these whirlpools grab people downward in a way that just feels like couldn't like the rich kid who seems like he's the captain of every team like have a problem? Like, why does it seem like everything that goes well? Listen, I'm not so binary as to think like the captain of the football team is happy and the kid who's in a learning supported class is miserable. It doesn't actually play out like that. But I do think that when you have like the dominoes do fall for people
Mm,
that
mhm.
when when you are dealing with poverty and food insecurity and crime in your neighborhood and issues that they're compounding issues fundamentally. It's like you're not going to get just one of them generally.
That's right. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk solutions. We need them today.
Oh, good. Let's solve this, Amy.
So we always talk about solutions in the third section of our podcast episodes, but today we're really going to talk about them. These are little tweet. This is the first part. They're tweet only because anybody who listens to this podcast does these things already. But let's move through the we can do this, people part. It's time to value and respect the time spent parenting on par with time spent working at a paying job, recognizing the critical importance to society of raising children.
Yes, please.
That parents and caregivers have primary responsibility for raising children doesn't mean they should have to do it entirely on their own.
Yes.
That's correct. We need to talk openly about the stress and struggles that come with parenting.
Yes.
Here in the What Fresh Hell podcast, right? We have to foster a culture of connection among parents to combat loneliness and isolation. That's the culture shifts.
Yes.
So I typed all that, and then I was like, okay, but anybody listening to this episode is doing these things. How do we get everybody else onto that mindset of this is work that's important and stressful and it matters?
Well, I think about in special needs parenting and special education that there are a ton of supports, and having participated in those programs and having had access to those supports, I often think everybody should have these support. It does seem like that you can excuse yourself from class and go meet with a counselor if you're stressed out, that you get a quarterly meeting with the staff to go over how it's going. And I understand that the resources are too scarce to do that with every single kid. But what I know about my kid who has supports is so different than what I know about my other kids. And I think everybody could use access. And my husband, who was a teacher, always says special education is just more good education. It's not a different kind of teaching. It's just that you kind of drill down and spend more time on the positive things about teaching and connection and taking more time with stuff and scaffolding and spiraling and all of these terms we use in special education to get kids to their goal. And I think that is something, and in certain special education, like county programs or state programs, they offer people to come in, counselors to come in and work with the family on how to parent successfully with a child with special needs. They might offer nursing care to come in and help with medical needs of a child. And most of them offer what is called respite care. So if you are the full-time caregiver of a medically complex child and you are registered with, in New York, the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, they provide respite cares. A babysitter comes because they acknowledge that being a 24/7 caretaker of a medically complex child is too hard for people. So they need respite care. And it feels like these kind of organizations, which, believe me, because they're government and its bureaucracy, have a million other problems and a million other critiques you could make of them. It does feel like there is some role to say, we actually, all of us need a little bit more of this.
Or just that they exist. One of the sort of concrete things that the Surgeon General suggested that I thought, well, this is actually a good suggestion, that this social infrastructure exists. Sometimes there's infrastructure in place to support that parent who really needs early morning drop-off twice a week. And maybe that parent doesn't even know that exists, right? That there's a thing in their community that this is. So the Surgeon General said that doctors and pediatricians should be given more full read-in on social infrastructure. And then doctors should be screening parents for mental health concerns at pediatrician visits. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And if they get back that there's stress or anxiety or depression, or they get a read from the questions that they ask, then you say, did you know about this program? That part of the problem is there's when you're in it, right? When you're in the barrel, you don't have time to look for an early morning drop-off program in your community. Even if there's one that's half a mile away, you might not have the bandwidth to go figure that out. That doctors' offices are a good place to make those things more visible. I thought that was a good suggestion.
Really good suggestion. Now, I also think school counselors can be good at this. And it's something that you have to do some outreach around. But yes, one of the problems with bureaucracies in general and government bureaucracies in particular is connecting the people with the resources. That there's a huge disconnect there. And I've had conversations with my kids' school about a lot of different things. Oh, this one needs like this kind of tutoring, and it's so expensive, and maybe we'll start it next semester because this semester isn't good for us. Do you know that if you apply for X, Y, and Z, you can get tutoring help? Or do you know that there's
Mm.
high schoolers who do tutoring at the library? Your library may have programs to help you. I know through scouting, like your scouting group may be looking for activities to do. And I think connecting people to help is really, really important. And one of the things is making sure that you're raising that flag when you can.
Hmm. Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. The things we can do for ourselves as parents that this study suggests. Prioritizing self care, which includes a balanced diet and sleep. Okay. Yes. Nurture connections with other parents and caregivers. This is wonky and specific and good. Learn about health insurance options that do exist to get more comprehensive coverage for you and your family that include mental health coverage.
And honestly, your health insurance may include massage. It may
Yeah.
include all sorts of things that people don't take a tremendous it may include partial coverage of a gym membership.
Mm.
And so figuring out what the resources are, and I also want to double tap on the sleep issue, because I understand that these things feel very facile and tweet to be like, just get more sleep and take better care of yourself. And it's like, okay, great. As soon as my head
As
stops being
soon as
on
I graduate
fire,
and stop
I'll
working the
make
two
sure.
jobs, right?
Yeah. But I do think that sometimes we do skip the step of, I need help.
Mhm.
And I think that I hope that most people have somebody in their lives that they can say, I'm really drowning. I think I need help. And this is harder with people who have chronic problems. And
Right.
knowing people who have really difficult chronic issues with poverty, chronic health problems that may involve poverty, that chronic problems, I get it. Like, people after a year may get tired of helping, and you may have to. I can't say that I'm going to give you the correct solution to that on the podcast, but I have found that I need help, and then connecting to that help and not trying to solve people's problems on your own. The longer I live, the more I've had connections with mental health services, incarceration services, pro bono lawyers who can help you get your house back when they're trying to
Mhm.
foreclose on it. I mean, there is help sometimes available if you can just stop for long enough to say, I need help. And sometimes that just might mean I need 12 hours of sleep.
Right.
Someone will get you that.
Yeah, you can get 12 hours of sleep, and that basic I had a teacher asked me once. One of my kids was a very good sleeper and also a good student. And a fourth grade teacher asked me, "How much sleep a night does your kid get?" And I told her, I think whatever it was he was supposed to be getting, he was getting. And she said, "I knew it. I knew it." She said, "The kids who like are in a good mood every day and are the ones who get the most sleep." And I think that's true for parents too. And you're right. We can't solve like my spouse is deployed for 18 months, but we can solve, can the kids have a sleepover at your house this Friday night and my house next Friday night, and then you'll sleep till you wake up for once? That's not
Yeah.
nothing.
I've said before, when my kids were little, in those, 3 under 4 years, Saturday, I slept in every Saturday. My husband always took the kids out on Saturday, and I could sleep until noon if I wanted to. And sometimes it was like Wednesday, and I just felt like I was crawling over broken glass, but I knew I was going to sleep on Saturday, and that made it okay. Just knowing that was there for me.
I want to go through some of these. I want to go through some of these society level fixes too, because they're easier said than done, but they matter. And I wanted to start with one based on something you were just talking about, that the Surgeon General says we should promote visitation initiatives and reentry programs to support formerly incarcerated parents and caregivers and their families, that's something we need to put more money and resources into.
Yeah, and I think for people who don't know incarcerated people, this can feel very, very distant. I just saw a statistic yesterday that 50% of people in the United States are affected by incarceration within their family.
50%.
50%. So this isn't something that's happening to other people. I mean,
Mm.
I think it feels like that sometimes for people, but this is a huge societal issue, and it's something that um, it really affects families.
Another society level fix is to establish a national paid family medical leave program and ensure that all workers have paid sick time.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really good.
That would be really good, and it's really worthwhile. And as Dan Worry said when I interviewed him about his book, The Daycare Myth, he said, we're paying. It would take a lot more money to do things the way I'm saying we need to do early childcare, but we're wasting money now on all of these things that are happening 20 years from now because we're not taking care of our children properly in the first couple of years of their lives.
Super hard to do because the outcomes and the money spent are so far apart.
Yeah.
Always very hard to make policy when the outcomes are 20 years away. But I think we've seen enough cycles to know that the outcomes being far away is going to keep happening. So maybe it's time to change
Maybe
something.
it's time. Another fix is that society needs to address the economic and social barriers that contribute to the disproportionate impact of mental health conditions for certain parents and caregivers. So going all the way back to what we were saying at the beginning. Yes, your heart is hard. Every parent is stressed out. All of us deserve to honor that stress and take care of ourselves. Some people are really in it, either some of the time or all of the time. And those people are disproportionately affected by mental health conditions. So we have to do something about it.
Yeah, sometimes the wider solutions feel to me like it just feels like I can't add that to my list right now, like government policy. But I do think as we just have conversations about this and think about what this looks like and where people need more help. And I think for me, the takeaway of like talking to your pediatrician, your school counselor, like, is there more help available to me? And then
Mhm.
starting to think about widening that and saying, we want more people to ask that question and have the answer be yes. That seems simple to me.
It means we've solved it.
I mean, people
Just
we've
ask for help,
solved,
guys.
just ask for help. But I mean, do try. Like,
Yeah.
do try.
That's
And then let's try to maybe make the help a little bit more available.
I'll give you the takeaway from the Surgeon General's report, which we will link to in the show notes. Dr. Murthy says at the end that a pro-family America requires a cultural change, one that envisions parenting as a societal good and therefore is the responsibility of the entire society. He says parenting is sacred work.
Hashtag cosign.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel seen. I felt seen by this report, if definitely a little bit daunted. I thought, yeah, this all tracks. It makes sense in this idea that stressful, chronic, constant stress can impact your health. I already accepted that to be true about kids. I had never really thought about it affecting parents, but yes, it's
Yeah.
worth doing something about this.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've said it before. This is as hard as you think it is. And
Mhm.
I think it is probably the hardest thing we can do. And sometimes it feels like the least supported thing that we do. And
Yes.
those two things being true at the same time makes it really hard.
Yes.
But luckily we solved it, Amy. Thank goodness.
I'll let
Phew.
the Surgeon
Yeah,
General
let him
know.
know. We got it
You
all
can
covered.
withdraw.
45 minutes and out. We got it all taken care of over
They'll
here.
put
at
out a
What Fresh
press
Hell.
release. We have formally
Never mind.
withdrawn.
Never mind. All set. Thanks, Amy and Margaret. Thanks again.
We've solved it.
Oh, friends, go try to get 12 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Ask for help if you need it, and we will talk to you next time.
So long.